I stood in the empty corporate boardroom at midnight, watching security cameras as CEO Marcus Thornfield paced frantically on the phone with investors. 3 days ago, I was the excited new senior research engineer at Pinnacle Tech Solutions. This morning, arrogant director Shane Caldwell fired me with a smirk. This afternoon, legal went pale reading my original employment contract. Tonight, the emergency board meeting revealed the truth that will destroy them all. Every breakthrough patent they've been pitching to investors for 5 years belongs to me. Looking back, I should have trusted my instincts from the very beginning. The warning signs were there, subtle, but persistent, like hairline cracks in what appeared to be a perfect foundation. But when you've dreamed of working for a company like Pinnacle Tech Solutions your entire career, you tend to overlook the red flags waving right in front of your face. My journey to Pinnacle started at MIT, where I earned my electrical engineering degree with a focus on energy storage systems. For 5 years after graduation, I worked at smaller firms, developing revolutionary battery technology that could change how we power everything from smartphones to electric vehicles. My innovations weren't just incremental improvements. They were breakthrough discoveries that could extend battery life by 300% while reducing charging time to mere minutes. When Marcus Thornfield personally called to offer me the senior research engineer position, I felt like I'd won the lottery. Pinnacle Tech Solutions was Silicon Valley's rising star, the company everyone was talking about. Their stock price had tripled in 2 years, and industry magazines featured Marcus on their covers as the visionary CEO revolutionizing energy technology. The interview process felt like a dream. Marcus himself conducted the final interview, his charm infectious as he spoke about changing the world through innovation. He seemed genuinely interested in my background, asking detailed questions about my previous research and the patents I'd developed. His enthusiasm was intoxicating, and when he offered me a position with a salary that was 30% higher than my current job, I signed the contract immediately. My first day at Pinnacle's gleaming headquarters in Palo Alto exceeded every expectation. The building itself was a testament to technological advancement, with solar panels covering every surface and electric vehicle charging stations filling the parking garage. Inside, state-of-the-art laboratories stretched across 3 floors, equipped with equipment I'd only dreamed of accessing. Patricia Wells, the friendly HR director, gave me a comprehensive tour that lasted nearly 3 hours. She introduced me to key players throughout the organization. Dr. Sarah Chen, the brilliant chief technology officer, impressed me immediately with her depth of knowledge and genuine passion for innovation. Robert Harrison, the CFO, seemed more focused on numbers than technology, but his intense demeanor suggested he took the company's financial success seriously. The research team welcomed me warmly, eager to share their current projects. As they walked me through Pinnacle's flagship developments, my excitement grew exponentially. They were working on revolutionary smartphone batteries that could last for days, electric vehicle systems that could travel over 1,000 miles on a single charge, and solar storage solutions that could power entire neighborhoods during peak demand periods. But as the presentations continued, a strange feeling began gnawing at my stomach. The technology they were describing sounded remarkably familiar. The algorithms, the chemical compositions, even the testing methodologies matched work I'd done at my previous company, Quantum Dynamics. When I mentioned the similarities, Dr. Chen smiled and said they'd obviously been inspired by similar research in the field. My second day started with enthusiasm, but that uncomfortable feeling only intensified. During a team meeting, I watched a presentation that included charts and graphs I recognized immediately. They were displaying my own research papers, the ones I'd published in peer-reviewed journals, but without any attribution. When I raised my hand to point out the source, the presenter dismissed it as commonly available prior art that inspired our current direction. After the meeting, I approached Dr. Chen privately, expecting a simple explanation. Instead, she became evasive, suggesting we discuss it later when she had more time. Her reaction struck me as odd, especially since she'd been so open and welcoming the day before. That evening, I stayed late to familiarize myself with the company's research database. As I scrolled through patent applications and research documents, my confusion deepened. Not only were they using my published research as foundation material, but they'd filed patents claiming improvements on my original innovations without acknowledging the source work. Jenny Martinez, one of the lab technicians, noticed me working late and stopped by with a cup of coffee. She seemed nervous as she glanced around to make sure we were alone. "Can I give you some advice?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "There are complicated politics around intellectual property here. Some people get very territorial about research ownership. Just be careful about asking too many questions too quickly." Her warning sent chills down my spine. Why would asking about proper research attribution be dangerous in a legitimate technology company? As I drove home that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stumbled into something much more serious than simple oversight. The discovery that changed everything came purely by accident. While researching background materials for a project assignment, I found my own patent applications from quantum dynamics listed in Pinnacle's research database. They were filed under inspirational prior art in current research proposals, with no mention of my authorship. My name appeared nowhere in the documents, despite the fact that every innovation they were claiming had originated from my previous work. Sitting alone in my apartment that night, I realized the horrible truth. Pinnacle Tech Solutions hadn't hired me for my expertise. They'd hired me to gain access to my innovations, and now they were claiming ownership of technology I'd spent years developing. The dream job I thought I'd won was actually an elaborate trap, and I'd walked right into it. I arrived at work on my third day determined to address the patent issue professionally and directly. Despite Jenny's warning about company politics, I couldn't ignore what amounted to intellectual property theft. My father had always taught me that problems don't disappear when you pretend they don't exist. They only grow larger and more complicated. My plan was simple. Schedule a meeting with Dr. Chen to discuss the attribution issues calmly and rationally. Surely there was a reasonable explanation, and we could resolve everything with proper documentation and credit where due. I'd always believed that honest communication could solve most professional conflicts, but when I found Dr. Chen in her office that morning, her demeanor had changed completely from our previous interactions. Instead of the warm, welcoming mentor I'd met during my first 2 days, she seemed distant and uncomfortable. When I brought up my concerns about the patent citations, she became visibly nervous, checking her phone repeatedly and avoiding direct eye contact. "These things are always more complicated than they appear," she said, her voice lacking its previous confidence. "There are legal considerations and corporate procedures that require careful handling. Maybe we should discuss this another time when I've had a chance to review the specifics." Before I could respond, her assistant knocked on the door to announce an urgent meeting. Dr. Chen practically rushed me out of her office, promising we'd continue our conversation later. Something was definitely wrong, and her evasive behavior only confirmed my growing suspicions. The morning took an even stranger turn when Patricia Wells gathered the entire research division for an unexpected announcement. Standing beside her was a man I'd never seen before, tall and expensively dressed, with the kind of confidence that comes from never being challenged. "I'd like everyone to meet Shane Caldwell, our new research director," Patricia announced, though her smile seemed forced. "Shane brings extensive management experience and will be overseeing all research division operations moving forward." Shane stepped forward with a smirk that immediately put me on edge. As he introduced himself, he made a point of mentioning his MBA from Wharton and his previous success in optimizing research efficiency at other technology companies. What he didn't mention was any actual technical expertise or engineering background, which seemed unusual for someone directing advanced battery research. "I look forward to evaluating our current projects and personnel," Shane said, his eyes scanning the room before landing on me with unmistakable hostility. "Some changes will undoubtedly be necessary to align with our strategic objectives." After the meeting, I learned from workplace gossip that Shane was Marcus's nephew, recently hired despite having no background in energy technology or research management. His previous positions had been in consulting and business development, fields that had little relevance to our scientific work. During lunch, I tried to make sense of the situation by seeking out Patricia Wells for clarification. I found her in the cafeteria, sitting alone and looking stressed in a way I hadn't noticed during my first 2 days. "Can I ask you about Shane's background?" I said, joining her at the table. "His experience seems different from what I'd expect for a research director." Patricia glanced around nervously before answering. "Between you and me, Shane was specifically brought in to manage certain personnel issues that have been concerning upper management. Sometimes technical people focus too much on details and not enough on the bigger picture." Her explanation made no sense to me. In research and development, attention to detail was crucial for both safety and success. What kind of personnel issues would require hiring someone without technical expertise to oversee scientific work? That afternoon, Shane called his first team meeting, and his agenda became crystal clear. He spent an hour criticizing our current research methodologies, dismissing established scientific protocols as inefficient legacy processes. When I suggested that our testing procedures were industry standards developed for safety and accuracy, he cut me off with visible irritation. "I'm not interested in hearing about how things used to be done," he snapped. "My job is to modernize this division and eliminate obstacles to productivity. Some people adapt to new management styles, and others need to find opportunities elsewhere." The threat in his words was unmistakable, and I noticed several colleagues shifting uncomfortably in their seats. After the meeting, Dr. Chen approached me with an expression of barely concealed worry. "Alexandria, can I give you some advice?" she whispered. "Shane has Marcus's complete confidence, and he's already been asking questions about your hiring and background. Maybe it would be better to keep a low profile for a while." Her warning hit me like a physical blow. In 3 days, I'd gone from being a welcomed new team member to being targeted by new management. The coincidence was too obvious to ignore. Shane had been brought in immediately after I'd started asking questions about patent attribution. That evening, I decided to research company policies and procedures more thoroughly. Using my employee access to the corporate database, I discovered that Pinnacle had filed dozens of continuation patents based on innovations I'd developed at Quantum Dynamics. They weren't just using my published research as inspiration. They were claiming ownership of incremental improvements to my original work, building an entire intellectual property portfolio on my foundation. The scope of the theft was staggering. Every major breakthrough that had driven Pinnacle's stock price and investor interest originated from technology I'd developed years before joining the company. They hadn't just stolen my work, they'd built their entire business model around it. As I was leaving the building that evening, Shane appeared in the parking garage, his presence both unexpected and menacing in the dim lighting. He approached my car with deliberate slowness, clearly wanting to intimidate me. "I know what you've been researching in our database," he said, his voice low and threatening. "And I know what questions you've been asking around the office. Let me give you some free advice. Certain people want you gone before you can cause complications for this company. You can make this easy on yourself, or you can make it difficult. Your choice." Standing alone in that empty parking garage, I felt genuine fear for the first time since starting at Pinnacle. Shane wasn't just making workplace threats. He was warning me that powerful people saw me as a problem that needed to be eliminated. The dream job I'd thought I'd won had become a nightmare. And I was trapped in the middle of something much more dangerous than simple corporate politics. But as I drove home that night, fear began transforming into determination. They might have stolen my work, but they hadn't broken my spirit. My father had always taught me that bullies only succeed when good people refuse to fight back. Shane Caldwell was about to learn that he'd picked the wrong person to intimidate. I arrived at Pinnacle the next morning, earlier than usual, my mind racing with plans and strategies. The previous evening's encounter with Shane had clarified the situation completely. This wasn't about workplace politics or management restructuring. It was about silencing me before I could expose their theft of my intellectual property. My plan was to document everything systematically before they could destroy evidence or fabricate justifications for their actions. I needed copies of the patent applications, email communications, and research documents that proved their systematic theft of my innovations. Then I would contact a patent attorney and explore my legal options. But Shane had anticipated my response, and he'd prepared his own strategy. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, my computer notified me of an urgent meeting in Conference Room B. When I arrived, Shane was waiting with Patricia Wells and a security guard I didn't recognize. Patricia looked uncomfortable and avoided making eye contact, while Shane sat behind a stack of official-looking documents with an expression of barely concealed satisfaction. "Please sit down, Alexandria," Shane said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "We need to discuss your employment status at Pinnacle Tech Solutions." Before I could respond, he opened a folder and began reading from what I recognized as a performance evaluation form. According to his fabricated assessment, I had displayed poor teamwork skills, questioned established procedures inappropriately, and demonstrated concerning behavioral issues that suggested I wasn't a good cultural fit for the organization. "These are serious concerns that have been brought to management's attention by multiple team members," Shane continued, his voice adopting a tone of fake professionalism. "After careful consideration, we've decided that immediate termination is in everyone's best interest." I stared at him in complete shock. Everything he was reading was false. I'd received positive feedback from every colleague I'd worked with, and my technical contributions had been praised during team meetings. The performance issues he was describing had never happened. "This is completely fabricated," I said, finding my voice. "None of these incidents occurred. I want to speak with Marcus immediately." Shane's smirk widened as he reached for another document. "Unfortunately, Marcus is in crucial investor meetings and can't be disturbed. However, he's reviewed this situation personally and supports the decision completely." Patricia finally spoke up, though her voice was barely above a whisper. "Alexandria, you have the right to file a formal complaint through HR channels, but the termination decision is final." I looked at her in disbelief. During my tour of the company, she'd been enthusiastic and welcoming, praising my background and expressing excitement about my contributions to the research team. Now she was participating in what amounted to a coordinated attack on my career and reputation. Shane pushed the termination papers across the table with obvious satisfaction. "I'm the new director, and I consider you already replaced. Please sign these documents acknowledging receipt of your final paycheck and the return of all company property." The security guard stepped forward as Shane's theatrical gesture reached its climax. "You have 30 minutes to clean out your desk and surrender your access badge. Company policy requires immediate escort from the building following termination." As I was led through the office to my desk, other employees watched in stunned silence. Many of them looked confused and concerned, clearly unaware that my termination had been planned. Dr. Chen appeared in her doorway and shook her head sadly, but she didn't intervene or offer any support. While I packed my personal belongings under security supervision, Jenny Martinez approached cautiously. She glanced around to make sure Shane wasn't watching, then slipped a small flash drive into my hand. "There's something on here you need to see," she whispered urgently. "Don't let them see it." I managed to pocket the device without attracting attention, though my hands were shaking with anger and shock. Whatever information Jenny had risked giving me, it was clearly important enough that she was willing to endanger her own job. The walk through the lobby was the most humiliating experience of my professional life. The large screens that displayed company achievements and investor presentations were showing the technology I'd developed, now branded as Pinnacle Innovations. Employees and visitors watched as security escorted me out like a criminal, though I'd done nothing wrong except ask questions about intellectual property theft. During the drive home, I felt completely numb. In less than a week, I'd gone from landing my dream job to being fired under false pretenses. My career reputation could be permanently damaged by Shane's fabricated performance review, and I had no immediate recourse through normal channels. That evening, I called my college friend Beth Thompson, who had become a successful patent attorney in San Francisco. Through tears of frustration and anger, I explained what had happened at Pinnacle. Beth listened carefully, asking detailed questions about the timeline and the specific patents involved. "This sounds like deliberate intellectual property theft," she said after hearing the full story. "Don't sign anything else they send you. And don't talk to anyone from Pinnacle without legal representation. Can you email me copies of your original employment contracts and any documentation you have about your previous patents?" After ending the call with Beth, I remembered the flash drive Jenny had given me. When I inserted it into my personal computer, I found a folder containing dozens of internal emails between Marcus, Shane, and other executives. The subject lines alone were enough to make my blood run cold. The Alexandria problem, research security concerns, and timeline for personnel action. As I read through the email chain, the full scope of their conspiracy became clear. Marcus had personally recruited me not for my expertise, but specifically to eliminate any future challenges to their patent claims. They'd planned my termination from the moment I accepted the job offer, timing it to occur after they'd gained access to my research background, but before I could mount any legal challenges. One email from Shane to Marcus was particularly damning. "She's starting to ask the right questions about patent attribution. Legal thinks she could cause serious problems if she investigates further. Recommend immediate termination before the investor presentation next week." Reading those words in black and white, I realized that my entire employment at Pinnacle had been an elaborate trap. They'd hired me to neutralize me, and Shane's hostile behavior had been carefully calculated to justify my termination. Every friendly interaction with Dr. Chen, every welcoming gesture from Patricia Wells, had been part of a coordinated deception designed to prevent me from recognizing the truth until it was too late. But as I sat in my apartment that night, surrounded by the wreckage of my career, I felt something unexpected rising within me. Not just anger or frustration, but a cold, determined fury that Shane and Marcus had seriously underestimated. They thought they could steal my work, destroy my reputation, and intimidate me into silence. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The next morning, Beth Thompson arrived at my apartment with a briefcase full of legal documents and an expression that mixed sympathy with professional determination. As one of the most respected patent attorneys in Silicon Valley, she'd handled cases involving some of the biggest technology companies in the world. But even her extensive experience hadn't prepared her for what we'd uncovered about Pinnacle Tech Solutions. "I've been up all night researching your situation," she said, spreading contracts and patent applications across my kitchen table. "What they've done isn't just unethical, it's criminal fraud on a massive scale. The key to everything lay in my original employment contract with Quantum Dynamics, the company where I developed my breakthrough battery technology. When I'd left Quantum Dynamics to pursue opportunities in Silicon Valley, my departure had been completely amicable. The company was small, focusing primarily on government research contracts, and they'd understood my desire to work in the commercial technology sector. More importantly, my Quantum Dynamics contract contained a clause that would prove to be Pinnacle's downfall. Because I'd developed much of my revolutionary battery technology during my own time, using my personal laboratory and resources, I'd retained ownership rights to all pre-existing research that had formed the foundation of my innovations. "This is the smoking gun," Beth explained, pointing to a specific paragraph in the contract. "You own the intellectual property rights to the core technology that Pinnacle has been claiming as their own innovation. Everything they've built, every patent they've filed, every presentation they've made to investors is based on technology that belongs to you." As we researched further, the scope of Pinnacle's theft became staggering. Over the past 5 years, they'd filed more than 40 patents claiming improvements and applications of my original battery technology. These weren't minor modifications or incremental advances. They were wholesale appropriations of my fundamental discoveries, repackaged and presented as original Pinnacle innovations. The financial implications were enormous. Beth's research into Pinnacle's investor presentations revealed that they'd raised over $200 million in funding based primarily on their supposed ownership of revolutionary battery technology. Major automotive manufacturers had signed licensing agreements worth tens of millions more. The entire business model of Pinnacle Tech Solutions was built on a foundation of stolen intellectual property. Marcus knew exactly what he was doing when he recruited you. Beth said, her voice filled with professional outrage. He specifically targeted you to gain access to your innovations and eliminate any potential challenges to their patent claims. This wasn't opportunistic theft. It was a carefully planned conspiracy to defraud investors and steal your life's work. Our investigation into Shane Caldwell's background revealed an even more disturbing pattern. At his previous 2 companies, he'd been involved in similar schemes involving intellectual property disputes and questionable terminations of key researchers. In both cases, the companies had faced legal challenges from former employees claiming patent theft, and Shane had been brought in specifically to manage these personnel issues. He's a professional cleaner, Beth explained. Companies hire him to eliminate threats to their intellectual property claims, usually through intimidation, fabricated performance issues, or coordinated termination campaigns. Marcus brought him in specifically to handle you. The emotional weight of understanding their complete betrayal was overwhelming. Every friendly conversation, every welcoming gesture, every expression of excitement about my joining their team had been carefully calculated deception. They'd stolen years of my research and innovation, then manipulated me into a trap designed to silence me permanently. But Beth's next discovery transformed my anguish into focused determination. While researching Pinnacle's recent business activities, she'd found evidence that they'd already begun licensing my battery technology to major manufacturers. Companies like Tesla, Apple, and Samsung had signed multi-million-dollar agreements to incorporate Pinnacle's revolutionary energy storage solutions into their products. They're not just claiming ownership of your work, Beth said, her voice growing intense with professional excitement. They're actively profiting from it right now, generating millions in revenue from technology that legally belongs to you. We have grounds not just for patent infringement, but for fraud, theft of trade secrets, and conspiracy. The strategy Beth outlined was both elegant and devastating. Rather than filing a quiet lawsuit and hoping for eventual settlement, we would time our legal action for maximum impact on Pinnacle's business operations. According to Jenny's email evidence, Marcus was scheduled to present their latest innovations to a consortium of major investors the following week, hoping to secure an additional $100 million in funding. We'll deliver cease and desist letters exactly 1 hour before their investor presentation, Beth explained. That gives them no time to prepare alternative strategies or damage control. When their legal team realizes the implications of your patent ownership, they'll have no choice but to cancel the presentation or risk criminal charges for securities fraud. That night, as Beth prepared the comprehensive legal package documenting my ownership claims, I thought about my father's advice regarding bullies and the importance of standing up for what's right. Growing up, he'd taught me that integrity wasn't just about personal behavior. It was about having the courage to fight for justice, even when the odds seemed impossible. Marcus and Shane had counted on my being intimidated by their wealth, power, and professional connections. They'd assumed that a young engineer would be too frightened to challenge an established Silicon Valley company. They'd calculated that their systematic theft would remain hidden behind corporate lawyers and financial resources that dwarfed anything I could afford. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated not just my determination, but the strength of the evidence they'd created through their own arrogance. Every email Jenny had copied, every patent application they'd filed, every investor presentation they'd made had documented their theft in excruciating detail. As I signed the legal documents that would set our counterattack in motion, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my first day at Pinnacle: hope. Not the naive optimism that had made me vulnerable to their deception, but the confident hope that comes from knowing you're fighting for truth and justice. Marcus and Shane thought they'd destroyed my career and silenced my voice. Tomorrow, they would learn that they'd only made me more determined to expose their crimes and reclaim what belonged to me. The battle they'd started was about to become a war they couldn't win. The legal documents were delivered to Pinnacle Tech Solutions at exactly 2 o'clock on Thursday afternoon, precisely 1 hour before their scheduled investor presentation. Beth had timed the delivery perfectly, using a process server who handed the cease and desist letters directly to Catherine Morrison, Pinnacle's general counsel. as she was reviewing final presentation materials in the conference room. I wasn't there to witness Catherine's initial reaction, but Beth had stationed herself in the lobby to observe the immediate aftermath. According to her report, Catherine's face went completely pale as she read the first page of our documentation. Within minutes, she was making frantic phone calls while security guards were posted outside the conference room where investors had begun gathering. The investor presentation that Marcus had been planning for months was canceled with less than 30 minutes' notice. David Chang, the lead partner from Meridian Venture Capital, was reportedly furious at the last-minute cancellation, especially since his firm had been considering a $100 million investment in Pinnacle's technology. But the real drama was just beginning. Catherine Morrison's panicked call to Marcus, who was in his office preparing final presentation notes, triggered a chain reaction that would destroy everything he'd built through 5 years of systematic theft. "Marcus, we have a problem," Catherine said, her voice shaking as she burst into his office with our legal documents. "Alexandria Torres has filed comprehensive patent infringement claims against the company. She's documented ownership of the core technology underlying our entire product portfolio." According to Jenny Martinez, who overheard the conversation from the adjacent research lab, Marcus initially dismissed the threat with characteristic arrogance. "That's impossible. She was a junior engineer at a small company. We hired the best patent attorneys in Silicon Valley to ensure our intellectual property protection." But as Catherine read specific portions of my original quantum dynamics contract aloud, Marcus's confidence evaporated completely. The clause granting me ownership rights to pre-existing research wasn't just a technicality. It was an ironclad legal foundation that invalidated every patent Pinnacle had filed based on my innovations. Shane's reaction was even more extreme than Marcus's panic. When Catherine explained the legal implications of my ownership claims, he went into a rage that could be heard throughout the executive floor. His solution was characteristically aggressive and stupid. He wanted to fight the claims through intimidation and legal warfare. "She's bluffing," Shane screamed at Catherine and Marcus. "No junior engineer has the resources to challenge a company like Pinnacle. We crush her with legal fees and media attacks until she gives up." But Catherine Morrison hadn't built her reputation as Silicon Valley's top corporate attorney by underestimating legal threats. As she reviewed our documentation more carefully, the scope of Pinnacle's vulnerability became terrifyingly clear. "This isn't a nuisance lawsuit," she told Marcus and Shane with growing alarm. "She has documentation proving ownership of technology we've been licensing to major manufacturers. If her claims are validated, we're facing not just patent infringement penalties, but fraud charges that could result in criminal prosecution." The emergency board meeting was called within 2 hours of our document delivery. Board members who had been celebrating the upcoming investor presentation suddenly found themselves confronting the potential collapse of the company they'd spent years building. As Beth and I arrived at Pinnacle's headquarters for the emergency session, we could see the chaos our legal action had created. Employees were gathered in worried clusters throughout the lobby, clearly aware that something serious was happening, but uncertain about the details. Security guards were stationed at elevator banks, and several television news vans had already arrived in response to reports about the canceled investor presentation. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was electric with tension and barely controlled panic. Catherine Morrison had prepared a presentation outlining the legal implications of my patent ownership claims, and the board members' faces reflected their growing understanding of how completely they'd been deceived by Marcus's assurances about intellectual property protection. David Chang from Meridian Venture Capital had insisted on attending the emergency meeting, and his presence added an additional layer of pressure to an already explosive situation. His investment firm had conducted months of due diligence on Pinnacle's technology portfolio, and the revelation that their core innovations were potentially stolen property represented a massive failure of corporate governance. "Are you telling me that this company's entire business model is built on stolen technology?" Chang demanded, his voice cutting through the boardroom tension like a knife. "That every presentation we've reviewed, every patent we've verified, every licensing agreement we've celebrated is based on fraudulent claims?" Marcus attempted to maintain control of the narrative, presenting my claims as a desperate attempt by a disgruntled former employee to extort money from a successful company. But his explanations became increasingly frantic as board members asked detailed questions about the patent application process and the timeline of my employment. When I was invited to present my case to the board, the contrast between my calm documentation and Marcus's desperate deflection was immediately obvious to everyone in the room. I methodically outlined the evidence of systematic theft, from my original research at quantum dynamics through my targeted recruitment and orchestrated termination. Every innovation that drives Pinnacle's valuation originated from technology I developed years before joining this company, I said, maintaining steady eye contact with each board member. The patents they've filed, the licensing agreements they've signed, and the investor funding they've received are all based on intellectual property that belongs to me. Shane's response was characteristically aggressive and ultimately self-destructive. Instead of acknowledging the legal reality of our claims, he launched into a personal attack that revealed the depth of his involvement in the conspiracy. "She's lying about everything," he shouted, pointing accusingly in my direction. "This is industrial espionage disguised as a patent dispute. She came here specifically to steal our trade secrets and destroy this company." But his accusation backfired spectacularly when David Chang produced documents his firm had received during their due diligence investigation. Meridian Venture Capital had been secretly investigating Pinnacle's technology claims for weeks, concerned about inconsistencies in their patent applications and suspicious gaps in their research timeline. "Actually, Mr. Caldwell, our investigation supports Ms. Torres's claims completely," Chang said with obvious satisfaction. "We've been tracking the source of your innovations for months, and every breakthrough you've claimed can be traced directly to research she published years ago." Her arrival merely confirmed what we'd already suspected. The revelation that Pinnacle's major investors had been investigating potential fraud transformed the emergency meeting from damage control into corporate collapse. Board members who had trusted Marcus's leadership suddenly realized they'd been complicit in systematic deception that could destroy not just the company, but their personal reputations and legal standing. Catherine Morrison's final assessment was delivered with the precision of someone accustomed to corporate catastrophes. Based on the evidence presented tonight, Pinnacle Tech Solutions faces immediate legal action for patent infringement, fraud, conspiracy, and securities violations. Our exposure extends beyond civil penalties to potential criminal prosecution for systematic theft of intellectual property. As the meeting concluded, I watched Marcus's carefully constructed empire crumbling around him. The investors he'd courted, the board members he'd manipulated, and the executives he'd recruited were all abandoning him as the scope of his deception became undeniable. But the evening's most satisfying moment came when David Chang approached me directly as the board members filed out of the conference room. "Miss Torres, Meridian Venture Capital, would be very interested in discussing potential investment opportunities in your technology ventures," he said with a smile that contained both professional respect and personal vindication. "It appears we've been looking for innovative partners in all the wrong places." Standing in that boardroom, surrounded by the wreckage of Marcus's criminal conspiracy, I felt the first taste of the justice that my father had always promised would come to those who fought for what was right. The next morning brought a phone call that would become legendary in Silicon Valley circles. Marcus Thornfield, the once celebrated CEO who had graced magazine covers and keynote stages, was reduced to whispering desperately into his phone, "She owns every patent we've been pitching to investors for 5 years." The person on the other end of that call was William Stevens, the lead partner at Goldman Sachs who had been orchestrating Pinnacle's upcoming initial public offering. The IPO was supposed to value the company at over $3 billion, making Marcus one of the wealthiest entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley. Instead, Stevens was now demanding explanations for why their preliminary SEC filings were based on potentially fraudulent intellectual property claims. "I don't understand, Marcus," Stevens said, his voice carrying the controlled fury of someone watching hundreds of millions in fees evaporate. "Your legal team assured us that all patent claims had been thoroughly verified. Now you're telling me that your core technology belongs to a former employee you fired 3 days after hiring her?" The board's emergency vote of no confidence came within hours of our legal documents being served. Patricia Wells, who had seemed so supportive during my brief employment, was among the first to distance herself from Marcus's leadership, later testifying that she'd been pressured to participate in my termination, despite having serious ethical concerns about the process. Shane Caldwell's response to the developing crisis was characteristically aggressive and ultimately self-destructive. Rather than acknowledging the legal reality of my patent claims, he doubled down on his accusations of corporate espionage and industrial sabotage. His increasingly frantic behavior included attempts to access company servers to delete incriminating emails and research files. She planned this from the beginning. Shane insisted during an emergency executive meeting that Jenny Martinez later described to investigators. This was a coordinated attack on American innovation by someone who couldn't succeed through legitimate competition. But Shane's conspiracy theories collapsed when Catherine Morrison revealed that IT Director Tom Bradley had been secretly preserving all email communications and research files as part of a separate investigation into potential securities fraud. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit had been monitoring Pinnacle for months, following tips from industry whistleblowers who suspected the company's meteoric rise was based on questionable business practices. Every document, every email, every research file has been backed up and secured, Catherine announced to the assembled executives. Any attempts to destroy evidence will be considered obstruction of justice and reported immediately to federal investigators. The revelation that federal agents had been building a case against Pinnacle sent shockwaves through the remaining leadership. Dr. Sarah Chen, who had seemed so evasive when I'd asked about patent attribution, broke down completely and confessed her knowledge of the systematic theft. I knew the technology wasn't original Pinnacle innovation, she admitted through tears during a recorded statement to company attorneys. But Marcus convinced me that patent law was complicated and that we were operating within legal boundaries. When Alexandria started asking questions, I was told that addressing her concerns could jeopardize everyone's jobs. Jenny Martinez's testimony proved even more damaging to Marcus and Shane's remaining credibility. As a lab technician with access to research files and email systems, she'd documented months of conversations about managing potential patent challenges and neutralizing employees who asked inconvenient questions about intellectual property sources. They specifically planned Alexandria's termination before she was even hired, Jenny told federal investigators. Shane bragged about his experience in handling similar situations at other companies. He called it preventive personnel management. The media attention surrounding Pinnacle's collapse became a Silicon Valley sensation. Technology reporters who had celebrated Marcus's apparent innovations were now investigating the scope of his deception. Shane's background at previous companies came under scrutiny, revealing a pattern of intellectual property disputes and questionable employee terminations that suggested systematic criminal behavior. But the moment that sealed Marcus's fate came during a last desperate attempt to destroy evidence. Security cameras captured him in the server room at 2 o'clock in the morning, attempting to physically damage computer equipment that contained backup copies of stolen research and incriminating communications. Tom Bradley, the IT director who had been cooperating with federal investigators, had anticipated exactly this scenario. Not only were all files backed up in multiple secure locations, but his security systems had automatically alerted FBI agents the moment Marcus accessed the server room. He was literally caught red-handed attempting to destroy evidence in a federal investigation, Agent Rebecca Walsh later told reporters. We have video documentation of him attempting to delete files and damage equipment that contained evidence of systematic fraud and conspiracy. The criminal charges filed against Marcus included securities fraud, theft of trade secrets, conspiracy to defraud investors, and obstruction of justice. Shane faced similar charges, along with additional counts related to his pattern of intimidating and terminating employees who posed threats to fraudulent business schemes. David Chang's investment firm not only withdrew their planned funding but also filed civil suits seeking damages for the time and resources they'd wasted investigating fraudulent technology claims. Other investors quickly followed suit, creating a cascade of legal actions that guaranteed Pinnacle's complete financial collapse. This represents one of the most extensive intellectual property fraud schemes we've seen in Silicon Valley, Agent Walsh announced during a press conference. The defendants systematically stole innovations developed by legitimate researchers, then built an entire corporate empire based on fraudulent patent claims. The personal cost to Marcus extended far beyond criminal charges and financial ruin. His reputation in the technology industry was destroyed completely, and his previous accomplishments came under investigation as potentially fraudulent as well. Magazine covers that had once celebrated his vision now featured his mugshot and headlines about corporate crime. But the moment that provided the deepest satisfaction came when Marcus attempted one final desperate plea for mercy. During his arraignment hearing, he tried to claim that he'd been deceived by subordinates and had no knowledge of the patent theft that formed the foundation of his company's success. The federal prosecutor's response was devastating in its simplicity. She played recordings of Marcus's own voice from company meetings, discussing strategies for managing intellectual property challenges and eliminating potential complications from former employees. The defendant's own words, recorded during official company meetings, document his direct involvement in planning and executing this fraudulent scheme. The prosecutor stated, "There is no question about his knowledge or culpability in these crimes." Standing in that federal courtroom, watching Marcus Thornfield being led away in handcuffs, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from seeing justice served against someone who had stolen not just my work, but my dignity and professional reputation. My father's lessons about standing up to bullies had proven true once again. Sometimes the fight seems impossible, and sometimes the odds appear overwhelming. But when you're fighting for truth and justice, persistence and courage can overcome even the most powerful opponents. Marcus and Shane had thought they could steal my life's work and intimidate me into silence. Instead, they'd learned that integrity and determination are more powerful than wealth and corporate connections. 6 months later, I sat in my new laboratory as CEO of Torres Energy Solutions, surrounded by cutting-edge equipment and a team of brilliant engineers who shared my commitment to ethical innovation. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking San Francisco Bay, illuminating workbenches where my revolutionary battery technology was finally being developed without theft, deception, or corporate corruption. The legal resolution had exceeded even Beth's optimistic predictions. Not only had I received full recognition of my patent rights, but the settlement agreement included $47 million in damages for lost licensing revenue, plus ongoing royalties for all technology derived from my original innovations. Pinnacle Tech Solutions had declared bankruptcy and been dissolved, with all assets sold to pay court-ordered settlements and legal fees. Marcus Thornfield was serving a federal prison sentence of 12 years for securities fraud, theft of trade secrets, and conspiracy. During his sentencing hearing, the judge had specifically noted that his crimes had undermined public trust in Silicon Valley innovation and damaged the careers of legitimate researchers whose work was stolen for personal profit. Shane Caldwell faced even harsher consequences, as federal investigators had uncovered evidence of similar fraud schemes at his previous companies. His pattern of intimidating researchers and facilitating intellectual property theft had earned him an 18-year sentence, effectively ending any possibility of returning to corporate management. His professional reputation was so thoroughly destroyed that even his MBA from Wharton had been investigated for potential academic misconduct. But justice extended beyond criminal prosecutions to positive transformations for people who had been harmed by their schemes. Dr. Sarah Chen had joined my new company as Chief Technology Officer, bringing both her expertise and her commitment to ethical research practices. Her confession and cooperation with federal investigators had earned her immunity from prosecution, and she'd become a powerful advocate for intellectual property protection throughout Silicon Valley. "Working here feels like returning to pure science," Sarah told me during a recent team meeting. "For the first time in years, I can focus on innovation instead of worrying about legal compliance or ethical compromises." Jenny Martinez had also joined Torres Energy Solutions, bringing valuable technical skills and an insider's understanding of how corporate fraud schemes operate. Her courage in preserving evidence of Pinnacle's crimes had been crucial to our legal victory, and her continued friendship meant more to me than any financial settlement. I knew what they were doing was wrong, Jenny said, but I never imagined that standing up to them would lead to something this amazing. We're not just building better technology. We're proving that honest innovation is more powerful than corporate theft. The partnership with David Chang's investment firm had exceeded all expectations, providing not just funding, but strategic guidance for building a truly ethical technology company. Meridian Venture Capital's reputation for thorough due diligence had attracted other investors who specifically sought opportunities to support legitimate innovation over quick profits. Your story has become legendary in our industry, David told me during a recent board meeting. Investors are specifically looking for companies with strong intellectual property protections and ethical leadership. You've created a new standard for technology entrepreneurship. The breakthrough products emerging from our research were already generating industry excitement and commercial interest. Major manufacturers who had been deceived by Pinnacle's fraudulent licensing agreements were eager to establish legitimate partnerships with the actual inventor of the technology they wanted to use. Tesla's head of battery development had visited our laboratories the previous week. Impressed not just by our technological capabilities, but by our transparent approach to intellectual property and research collaboration. This is how innovation should work, she'd said. Clear ownership, honest collaboration, and breakthrough results based on legitimate research. My personal growth during this journey had been as significant as any professional accomplishment. The frightened engineer who had been intimidated by Shane Caldwell's threats had evolved into a confident leader who understood that standing up for principles was not just morally necessary, but practically effective. The romantic relationship that had developed with James Morrison, a patent attorney who had supported our legal fight, brought personal happiness alongside professional satisfaction. His understanding of intellectual property law and his commitment to protecting inventors' rights made him both a valuable advisor and a caring partner who appreciated the challenges I'd overcome. You've changed how Silicon Valley thinks about innovation ethics, James told me one evening as we watched the sunset from our laboratory's observation deck. Companies are now implementing stronger intellectual property protections and employee rights policies specifically because of your case. But the most meaningful transformation was the mentoring program I'd established to help other young engineers protect their innovations and recognize potential exploitation. Through partnerships with universities and professional organizations, we were teaching researchers about patent law, employment contracts, and corporate ethics that could prevent them from falling victim to schemes like Marcus's. Knowledge is the best protection against exploitation, I explained to a group of MIT engineering students during a recent speaking engagement. Understanding your rights as an inventor and recognizing the warning signs of intellectual property theft can save you from years of legal battles and career damage. The industry recognition that followed our victory had been both gratifying and useful for advancing ethical innovation practices. Speaking engagements at technology conferences allowed me to share lessons learned from confronting corporate fraud, while media interviews helped expose the tactics used by companies that built businesses on stolen intellectual property. The life lesson that emerged from this experience was profound in its simplicity. Integrity and persistence triumph over corruption and intimidation when you're fighting for truth and justice. My father's advice about standing up to bullies had proven correct, but the stakes had been higher and the victory more complete than I could have imagined. True innovation belongs to its creator, and protecting that ownership isn't just about personal rights, it's about preserving the incentives that drive scientific progress and technological advancement. When companies can steal innovations without consequences, they discourage legitimate research and undermine the entire foundation of technological development. Standing up for your rights, even when it seems impossible, can transform not only your own life but create positive change for entire industries. Every person who refuses to be intimidated by corporate power makes it easier for the next person to fight for justice and truth. As I looked around my laboratory that morning, watching my team work on innovations that would genuinely improve people's lives, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing we'd won more than a legal victory. We'd proven that ethical leadership and honest innovation are more powerful than any amount of corporate wealth or political influence. The bullies who had tried to steal my work and destroy my career had only made me stronger, more determined, and more committed to proving that integrity always defeats corruption when you're willing to fight for what's right. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced workplace bullying or had someone try to steal credit for your work? How did you handle the situation? And what advice would you give to others facing similar challenges? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story of fighting back against corporate theft inspired you, please give it a like to help others find it. Subscribe to hear more stories about standing up for what's right, even when the odds seem impossible. And don't forget to share this with anyone who might need inspiration to fight for their own rights and innovations. Thank you for taking this journey with me. And remember, your work, your innovations, and your dignity are worth fighting for, no matter how powerful the people trying to take them away might seem. Stay strong, stay ethical, and never let anyone convince you that theft and intimidation are acceptable parts of professional life.